Well, hello there. My name is Carrie Varela. I'm the owner and founder of the Reiki Healing Society. And today in our podcast, we're going to be discussing the Reiki Precepts and how they've helped us explore deeper the meaning and purpose of Reiki, using it as a foundation for our practice, and also talk about how it's helped us navigate our life and the challenges of being a woman, but also maybe talking a little bit more in depth, getting a little Reiki geeky about the precepts today. So I'd love to start with Bronwyn. Bronwyn, you have studied Reiki for decades now, written several books, and you're part and parcel of a traditional voice of Reiki that really has illuminated the precepts as the cornerstone of a traditional way that Reiki is practiced. And I know for myself, after practicing a more Western style Reiki for many years, I certainly was aware of the precepts, but I wasn't as aware of them being like the cornerstone of a daily Reiki practice. So I just love to hear more from you. What's your journey with the precepts, and how have you brought them into your life, and what do you feel is most poignant and relevant about the precepts?
Thank you, Carrie. When I first learned the system of Reiki, the very first class that I did not, there was something about the precepts there was, but there wasn't much of a focus on them at all. And then I've also noticed even today that, people who come and do classes, and they may have done a class elsewhere, that there were some precepts mentioned in class, but they don't really know what they were, or they have a vague recollection of them, but they're not taught as the cornerstone of Reiki in a lot of different classes. So, the way that we see it is that you have different tools that we study in the system of Reiki and we practice, like hands-on healing, mantras, meditations, even the Reiju. So we do we practice these elements in order to be the precepts. So if we are the precepts, then we are Reiki. Yeah. So we spiritual energy, we are ultimately our true self. And that's why it's the most wonderful thing to be able to use the precepts in everything that we go through in our lives, because when we do, we have this opportunity to dig into a deeper, more profound truth and a way to support ourselves through all the different things that we go through, and I don't know how I used to function without the precepts, because they really tell me just straight down the line, am I being angry? Yeah, I'm being angry. Okay. And then I think about, I contemplate that. I contemplate the different things, ways that I have researched how I might support myself with that. And in that moment, but it takes me straight to that point. If I look at the precepts, so for we call them 5 precepts, but I often think of them as being 6 precepts, because we have this little bit that hangs at the top, and it says I call it for today only. I know Michaela says something else. There's slightly different variations on that, but basically it's saying that in this moment, or now, today, I will follow these precepts. And then it lays out these 5 precepts. And I find that this idea of for today only is possibly the most powerful aspect of all those precepts, because it's actually saying, take a look at yourself. Yeah. What are you doing? What's happening? What are you doing? How are you acting? Is this the life that you want to lead? So, I find that really, really important. And in fact, I did hear a guy talking on the radio who had done a PhD into creating habits. And he said that We often talk about 21 days as being an appropriate time. Like it's a good, we keep doing things regularly for 21 days and then we can follow on from that. He said, yes, that is true. But if you really want to create a habit, then do it today. He said that is the most powerful way to do it. And I had to laugh because, it's just like the precepts, right? So yeah, that's how I see that particular precept. And I don't know, maybe one of you guys would like to just go through the precepts for everybody.
I'll do it. Okay. Well, for today only,
Yeah.
Do not anger, do not worry, be kind, be grateful. And then there's a lot of ways you can translate. I've heard a lot of different translations of the next one, which is like the way I've learned it was, to work diligently. And the order might be a little off. Sometimes I do them in order, but worry, kind, gratitude, and then to do your work diligently or to work hard. But I'm also aware of a different translation of that is to being true to your way as well.
Yeah, I think some of them are direct literal translations and some of them are more a feeling translation, right? And I think we should be flexible, right? Don't we say we should be firm but flexible? So if we're flexible, I think we should be able to look at things from a lot of different perspectives. It's the same as an English word that we might use, and it has different meanings depending on the context that we use it in. It's the same in Japanese. So we're going to find different ways to, depending how you come at something, what you might feel that word represents for you. So it's going to be slightly different all the time. And I think that just gives us a more richness. We're all different and we get even more out of it. When I look at for today only, I see it as being this foundation for the precepts. Yeah. So we can say all those precepts, but if we don't have for today only, then when are we doing that, right? So it's sort of like that foundation base. But on the other hand, it also goes the other way. It's like they're built down underneath. So they all work together to help us be here now today. Yeah. So it sort of works from both ways. And that is why I put my hand up and say that is my favorite precept, and only because it includes all the other precepts in it. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're really speaking to the way in which we need to understand the precepts as an integrated whole and the whole system of Reiki as an integrated whole. And I think when I really first got that like the purpose of the system of Reiki is to live our lives as an embodiment of the precepts. That is not how I learned originally. As you two spoke, that the precepts were this like nice list of, yeah, that sounds like good things to do in your life, but what do we do with that? I didn't have a pathway to integrate that into the rest of the system. It seemed very disintegrated, in fact, unrelated almost to the hands-on healing that we were focusing on. And when I realized that the system of Reiki is about living our lives as an embodiment of this, as an integrated embodiment, and the rest of the system is there to help us do that, it all of a sudden the whole system started to come together as this integration. And even more so if we look at, the rest of the language, like around that core set of 6, each day, bring your hands in gaso, right? The prayer position, which in Shingon or in esoteric Buddhism, the roots of Reiki, the left hand represents us, the right hand represents the universe or all of life. And we're bringing those two things together. So we're concentrating our attention on this integration of ourself with all of life. Chant with your mouth, do this diligently, right? Make sound, use your voice, use your body, use your concentration to do what? To live as an embodiment of the precepts. And it becomes this layered experience, starting with something that seems very simple, right? This very simple list of things that sound like good ideas, right? To not go around angry and afraid, and to cultivate gratitude, to be kind. But what does it take us to actually live our lives that way, right? Moment by moment. And the system of Reiki gives us that path, right? All of these things together help us to do that in each moment. And thank goodness it's just for today, because if it's like Your job is now to live like your entire life truly embodying these things. Okay, go do that now. Right? We'd never get there because that's an impossible task to shift from, our normal day to day into, this very simple and yet challenging and very profound way of being. So yeah, integration is what's really coming as I listen to the two of you.
But what's your favorite precept?
It depends on the day. What I think about it, the way that I think about it, and using the contemplation practice that I learned from you actually, is that I'm very aware that on any given day, there's going to be one or more that are particularly challenging or that are particularly alive for me. I might be feeling particularly grateful or compassionate on a given day. I might have done a really good job, like not being attached to being afraid, like in a given moment. I can be like proud of that. Yeah, I'm really living that precept. On the other hand, I might be like completely averse to a particular one on a given day, right? No, I actually want to be angry today. Like I'm feeling really good in my righteous anger right now. I'd like to stay attached to that, right? Well, then that's probably the one I need to work with, right? Like that needs to be my favorite precept for that day so that I can release that anger, let it teach me whatever it's there to teach me, and then let it go on its way. So yeah, the idea, it's like, it's almost a trick question, right? What's your favorite? It's like, if it doesn't change from moment to moment, from day to day, then we're probably not paying enough attention to them, I think. Yeah.
Yep, sounds good.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I feel like my journey with the precepts, I remember the first time I heard them was I was receiving a Reiki treatment from the Reiki practitioner who I eventually studied to the master level with. And she just said them to me in the treatment. And I was just like, those words just are so beautiful. And they just landed in just a really soft place for me. And I don't know if I had a thought like I could say that a lot, and not knowing at the time that that would be like a really steady part of my practice to help me connect more deeply with Reiki. But it's always just kind of fun, like looking back at how like I received it at the very first moment. And but yeah, I remember just like, oh, such a beautiful thought, all those things so beautiful. It felt like little bumpers that could help me guide my experience in that moment. And yeah, and so I feel like the precepts for me have always just been like words to live by, and maybe for some period of time in my own experience of Reiki, it wasn't something I said every single day or really thought of every single day, but I've been integrating it more and more on a daily basis as my practice has grown, and I've found a deeper depth and a deeper maturity with it. And I think some of the reasons why I didn't really bring it into my life so much initially is that like sometimes I got really gung-ho with it, and yeah, I went to those moments where I was like, do not anger, and I'd be like, I really want to be angry, or I recognize that there's this anger inside of me, and it's not something that I can just say, I don't want to feel angry, or I don't want to feel that, or repress that emotion. And so I feel like I've had to learn new ways of relating to that term that help me acknowledge my anger and like see it and work on trying to heal it or to understand its deeper roots and where it's coming from. And just as a side note, I mean, maybe I'm going to focus on the do not anger piece because it feels pretty meaningful to me. And I found Reiki about the same time I really dived into my yoga practice. And I think the first year that I really practiced yoga, like almost every day or like consistently every week, I remember like so many times at the end of a yoga practice, just shaking and crying. And I couldn't really explain what I was feeling and what I was experiencing, but what I feel like I was experiencing with like a little perspective looking back at that time was that I was angry. I was like deeply, soulfully angry, and not something that I could really explain about, where that anger came from or why it was there. but that it was just there. And I remember like the first year of really diving deep into my spiritual practice, at some point the anger burned off and I felt totally different inside of myself. Like I felt like this bigger release, like, like I don't have to feel stuck in that feeling every single day. And that was like such a blessing. Like I yeah, and I'm so grateful for that. And I've seen actually others like go through that same experience themselves, like just really being stuck and deep moments of anger and maybe it's like this kind of backwards way that Reiki helps us heal too, is it's that like through the practice of Reiki and to moving my body intelligently and connecting in spiritually and into some different ways, like that energy started to move for me. And it wasn't necessarily so intentional that like every time I put my hands together, I was chanting the precepts, but I certainly knew the precepts at that point. But yeah, that was kind of my experience with them. But so for now, when I chant them, it's like it is a little bit more of like me being inquisitive about what my anger is, or if I'm feeling angry that day, and like celebrating if I'm not, but like really trying to understand my anger. And it's really helped me in my marriage too, because my husband sometimes he has some anger issues, and I don't think I could ever really relate to him without having that feeling of this like overwhelming sense of anger inside of myself. Like, and when I see somebody else like living from an angry place or throwing chairs or, it's like, it's almost like that's my, I can drop into compassion and be like, oh, I know what that feels like. And so it's just like trying to relate. And I don't know if about you, but when you like, when you're angry and somebody else is angry, it's it's like fire,
Yeah.
Yeah.
super explosive and really destructive. And so I think that my favorite one is that anger piece. It's just being able to like look at it differently, see it from a more compassionate place.
Yeah, look, suppressing it is not going to make it any better, right?
Yeah.
And as you know, and that's, but I think a lot of people do think, oh, I'm not going to anger, I'm not going to anger, I'm not going to, and that is just not going to help actually. But using the not anger helps in the sense of, if we think about if we didn't address the anger, we wouldn't be looking at our anger. So we need to address the anger. Yeah. So we could all go around doing lovely affirmations of, I feel peaceful and calm, and yeah, but inside we're bubbling up with this suppressed anger. Yeah. So that's not going to help. But actually looking at the anger, which is what it's asking us to do, is incredibly helpful. And something that I read recently, which I found quite helpful, was about imprinting, and that we imprint anger on ourselves the very first time we're angry, right? And then the second time that we're angry, which we can't remember this because we would have been tiny little things, and it would have been happening around us, and we've used that as an example, I'm thinking. But, the second time that we get angry, we already have the imprint there. So we know that we can just fall into that feeling. And Michaela, you said righteous anger, such great words, right? I know that feeling, and that is like, that's an imprint that's just like, yes, that's it, and you can just fall into that. And each time it becomes more deeply ingrained in who we are.
And this is where, again, that integration comes in, because what you just described, that falling more and more deeply into that imprint, that's like a constriction of our feeling of anger, right? We're getting more and more patterned into a particular way. And what we're being invited with the precepts, like particularly if we look at the original language in Japanese, is it's really more like inviting it into more spaciousness, making more room around it, bringing it into a more empty place inside of ourselves, so that it has some room that we can examine it, as you're saying. And so that integrates with Jashin Kokyo, right? Where we're bringing our attention down to our center, we're kind of concentrating in, and then we're expanding our awareness. We're imagining our center actually getting bigger and more spacious and taking up more room. And so if we contemplate, our anger on a given day while we're in that breath practice, my experience has been, this feeling of that constriction, of that patterning, that rut that we get into when we experience our anger and over and over in the same way is just this like spaciousness that gets put around that, where all of a sudden I can understand the anger more. I can see what it's there to teach me. I can take whatever I'm supposed to learn about my response. And then there's just all this room for it to dissipate and, become something more useful in my life. Right. And so, as you were saying, it's not to suppress it. It's not to ignore it. It's not to deny its value in our life. It exists in our system for a reason. Same with fear. Just for today, I worry not. But it's that attachment to it, right? That, oh yeah, I know this rut. I know this pattern. This feels good. I remember this, or this is just what I know. This is my habitual response. We put more space around that. And the piece that was coming, Carrie, when you were talking, particularly about, the way that working with the precepts has helped you understand your husband and other relationships, is like, this set of simple instructions, right? They describe the outcome of practicing the system of Reiki, and they give us some instructions on how to get there. So it's both sides of that. They really are like the most direct way in which we can integrate Reiki into our life, right? Aside from taking a few of those belly breaths. And I was having a conversation with my daughter, who's 11, earlier, and she was asking about happiness. She was like just working with some unhappiness, and she was a little bit concerned that she was like a selfish person. And so she was just kind of asking some questions about, ways of being. And she noted that, sometimes it's hard to be happy when she's so like focused on the things that she wants that she doesn't have. And, so we're talking about that. And it was so easy to fall into, well, here's how to be happy, right? Right. We work on letting go of that fear that we're not going to get that thing, that we want, right? We work on that place that's holding on, that's attaching. We work on that place that's angry that we don't have the thing. We work on being grateful for the things that we do in fact have. We work on being diligent about all of those things, and we work on being compassionate for, ourselves and in all of our, angsty places. And it was very clear, like she understood it. She's, 11, she's a kid. But it was so clear to her that not like, oh, now I can just start doing that. Yeah, that sounds easy. Let me just go do that. But the roadmap to happiness as a consistent way of being was clear to her. And that really struck me. It's like, again, it's simple and accessible, not easy, but simple.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's cool. Reiki for kids. Yeah, I think it's true for a lot of different ways you can look at, spiritual practices, is that like, there's a tendency to want to read it really surface level. And for a time you can read it really surface level. But then the struggle then is being very dogmatic and judgmental when you see other people struggling with anger or struggling with worry. And again, like that kind of repressed attitude. And so I feel like the beginning of my experience with Reiki was more like just kind of struggling with that, being like, like sometimes I can get a little self-righteous about like, I'm not supposed to worry or whatever. And then I just like pushing away worry. And some of that is actually quite useful because the worry is like telling me like, if I don't change course, I'm going to end up in a direction like in the gutter where I don't want to be. Right. And so I don't know, I think with more depth and just like studying it and looking at it from different perspectives, like one of the perspectives I've looked at it recently is like translating it as, just for today, I release anger. And that works for me sometimes, and I recognize that it's not necessarily the actual way it's translated, but nevertheless, I think that helps me work with things in a way that is like acknowledging of what I'm feeling and experiencing and not just trying to bypass around it. But I think it's also really important for us as practitioners is like when I'm relating to my clients is not doing it on that kind of dogmatic way.
Yeah, I so agree. And I know that when I teach it in class, I try not to actually say too much to begin with at all. And because I think that everybody's at their own point with each of these precepts. And I can tell them, okay, it's just like what you were saying, Michaela, about your daughter, like you could just say, this is this, right? I could just say, well, this is anger, this is worry, this is the, and people go, right? But the way that they're really going to learn is if I ask how anger relates to their lives, or does it relate to their lives? We need to work, carry that whole thing of working honestly. We need to work at looking at ourselves, not telling other people how to live their lives. And I know that I will often go into it and I will think to myself, I'm just going to let go of every thought that I have about anger, worry, compassion, any of that, because I'm just going to let it go, because I want the people who I'm with to discover that for themselves. I want them to see, what does it mean for them? And then we can have a chat about it. Then we can discuss and we can grow together in that. And, it's always different, never the same. And everybody has different experiences. And sometimes it's incredibly profound. Things that I wouldn't never in my life have thought about, or and I learned so much then from having that, as you're saying, flexible experience around it, instead of just being dogmatic and saying, well, these are the precepts, this is what they mean, and this is how you have to live your life. Yeah.
And it's about building a relationship with them, right? It's like, that was another big shift for me in my Reiki education and practice, was like, particularly around the precepts and around the symbols and mantras. It's like, if I don't have a personal relationship with them based on my practice, my experience, my life up until this point, my hopes and dreams for my life past this point, then they're not going to do me a whole lot of good. And that's how I spent the first couple of years in my Reiki practice, was not having a personal relationship with them. It's like they were tools, right? That like, you pick them up, you use them, you put them back. Instead of like, this is something that I have an intimate relationship with, that I have to work on, right? Like any other relationship. And when I do that, that's when they can bring fruit to my life. That's when they come to me at a moment's notice when they're needed, without having to think about it. I have a client and student who just recently came through a really scary, extremely painful illness. She's okay now, but she was sharing that automatically it was the precepts that she went to. Like, automatically that was the medicine that came to her. And how grateful she was to have that available to work, particularly with fear in her case. And that when it got too difficult, right, when it's like, I just can't stay focused on this, then, we had a session and I was just holding space for her with that, like knowing that fear was what she was like, that was her favorite precept at the time, right? Because that's the one that was really speaking to her experience. And so when we have that relationship born from our life, then, we know which one is alive in our life on a given day, just for today, just for this moment. And we'll automatically turn towards it. It becomes muscle memory, becomes automatic. That patterning that you were talking about, right? It becomes a patterning of opening up and turning towards, instead of constricting down.
Yeah.
All right. So what do you all think about your relationship specifically as women and the precepts? Does anything come up for you when you relate those two topics, or that feel very pertinent to you as a woman?
The precepts are making an incredible impact on my life. So any choices that I need to make in my life, and the times where I might feel, if I look for me, the times that I might feel unempowered, or drawn to anger as a response. I remember, like, when I was, I don't know, a teenager, and walking past construction sites. I don't know what it's like in the rest of the world, but here in Australia, this was in the 80s, the guys would call out things at you because you were a woman. And, it was not flattering. though I think they thought they were being flattering or something like that. I don't know what they thought. But I had a lot of anger about that sort of thing because I would, just swear back at them or something like that. But I feel really angry in myself about that. Looking at how we respond, learning compassion, being able to empathize and understand what it's like to be a man in this society, which is sort of what I guess I was just coming to as well. That is a big thing because for men, it's not so easy either. And we all have our own challenges. And a man is brought up thinking in a certain way about a woman, it's going to be really hard for that person to address, get insight into their own behavior and what's going on for them, to understand that too. So the precepts can definitely support me as a woman to see where I'm at and see where other people are at, and try to be a better person.
Well, in thinking back to our discussion last time about the experience of being in a female body and what it's meant to have Reiki in my life, I had been sharing about feeling the way in which one's gender, and this is true for all people, to varying degrees, that often we're put into these constricted places, right? We're put into these boxes, these patterns, as you were saying, right? It's not just the patterns of our emotions inside of ourselves, it's the restricted patterns of what we're supposed to be out in the world based on things like our gender, or what people think our gender is or think it should be. And so, when I think about the challenge of that and the different ways that has played out in my life at different periods, at different ages, at different stages, I can see so clearly the way that the precepts form that clear path of navigation through that, which I did not have for so long and now do have. And so I can see the clear difference in my life between having this practice that allows me, as I was saying, with regard to anger, that puts some spaciousness inside of myself and around me to hold a bigger perspective on myself, to let myself release those expectations based on arbitrary things like societal perspectives on my gender. That it allowed the following the precepts allows me to give myself more room inside, and then to act in the world, right? To behave in my relationships and in the world in a way that brings more spaciousness to other people. And so it's this compass, it's this point of navigation through those points of constriction and those points of trying to understand who I am and be that, particularly in those moments when that feels counter to what's expected of me. And it's such a blessing to have that. It's such an incredible gift that we get to take on, and then it becomes a responsibility as well, right? Because when we choose to center the precepts in our life, or something like the precepts, right, because they form a pattern that shows up in a lot of different traditions. So when we choose to center something like that in our life, right, there's this responsibility that comes with that, with how we're going to show up. And I'm really grateful to be able to accept that responsibility and do my best just for today, just for each moment, to live it as well as I can.
Yeah. So true. Yeah, I think it's so interesting too, because I feel like in some ways the precepts, they do really fall along maybe like stereotypes of how women should act, right? They should show up and not be angry and be just grateful. And so in some ways, when I think about it in terms of the patriarchy, it kind of makes me a little angry. Kind of wants to give me more freedom to express my anger, because I actually see, like, a lot of times I think women are angry and there is not a lot of societal normatives around being able to express your anger. A lot of times when people do express anger, it's often like met with a lot of like resistance from others. But nevertheless, I think it is really important, like, to looking at them from a more holistic lens, and looking at them not just through a gender lens, but also through just a societal lens. Like, what benefit would these precepts have if everybody, lived their life by them or guided by their life by them, which of course is unrealistic. But nevertheless, that's what comes to mind when I think about like the gender roles in terms of the precepts. But I know for myself, like, worry is the one exception, right? It's like almost like there is and as much as there's not a freedom for women to not anger, there's like a tremendous like freedom for women to worry. And I know that for me, and like the way I was raised is like um worry was love in a different way. It's like people express, my family is expressing their love for me through their worry about me. And I think that's a little skewed, of course. But I know for me now as a mom, like trying to kind of repair that generational gap for my kids, I'm realizing like how much I do worry about my kids. Like, oh my gosh. And if I let myself race off beyond today, I can get really, really lost in anxiety around, what kind of world my kids are going to grow up in, what kind of dangers they might face, and what it would be like to lose a child. And that's something that does keep me up at night. And I've realized, that like I have to readjust my perspective that worry isn't necessarily love. And I have to find another way of loving my kids. And one of the things that I realized when I was in my second pregnancy was that like I have spent my whole pregnancy just worrying about my unborn child and all of the milestones, and that I haven't spent any time visioning something beautiful for them.
Yeah.
Something wonderful for them. So anyways, worry has been one of those things. And I think also really telling for me when I'm working with somebody, and a lot of times worry might be one of those reasons why people seek out Reiki, or like they have this intuition that something's off, or maybe they're really out of control with anxiety. And that's what's really hard is like the potion is get out of that worried mind. And yet it's like the worries are just what is compounding their anxiety. And so and if you don't center them, like you were saying, Michaela, if you don't center them with the context of the precepts, then they can just easily spend that whole hour you're with them in Reiki just worrying, and that's their mindset, and they can't get out of it. So it is, I think, really helpful to, when we're working with clients, especially around anxiety, is like, okay, like what can we separate? How can we chunk away at this worry that you're feeling, and give it some new perspective and some space?
There's a couple of things you said in there, Carrie, that I really want to like circle back to. One of them is around the relationship of women generally and anger, and this general pattern in society, not true of everybody, but general pattern that anger is generally suppressed in female identified people, and therefore we learn to suppress it and probably feel shame about it when it comes out, and it can wreak havoc inside of our system because we're suppressing it. And the idea that the precepts actually, what my experience has been is that the precepts actually give me an avenue for that expression, that I have a much more healthy relationship with my anger. Not that I never have anger, right? But it doesn't have me. I'm not attached to it. I'm not an angry person. I'm a person who experiences anger when it's appropriate to have anger. Sometimes when it's not appropriate to have. Definitely not perfectly living the precepts in every moment of my life. Sure. But again, this mindset shift that, when we look at how the words are actually written in Japanese originally, what it's inviting us into is not exactly the way it's translated in English. It's not don't be angry or do not anger. It's anger not. And the word not like has these different connotations that, invite us into putting more room around our anger so that we can have a relationship with it, understand it, give it some space to educate us, and then dissipate and move away. And so all of that and understanding the precepts from that perspective has given me a much healthier relationship with anger and with fear, which has definitely been a default. And even, with sadness, which isn't explicitly addressed in the precepts, but is the one that is perhaps a little bit more familiar to female identified folks. Perhaps we're allowed sadness more readily than anger. And so, so I just wanted to really highlight that the precepts, while from a certain way of translating them might be seeming to instruct us to continue suppressing anger. That's
Right.
actually not what we're being invited into. We're being invited to have a healthy relationship with it.
I would say, yeah, I agree. And I don't think it is appropriate to have anger, but maybe it's a language thing. I think that because anger is an out of control emotion, which is what you were saying, Michaela, So it is this thing that we don't have control over. And because we don't have a control over it, it is something which can be very damaging and to ourselves and to other people. So yeah, I don't know. I think maybe there's a language thing around that. What I do see, and we had recently a political situation about this here in Australia, is a woman who didn't respond smiling to a man politically because he was giving her an award for something, but she didn't appreciate his attitude to her and how he had been with her in the past, things that he'd said to her. She was told that she should have smiled and sucked it up, basically. And it's that thing of women should not express how they feel. And I think, it doesn't have to be anger, but that we are not allowed to say what we feel. And instead we should just be quiet. Yeah. And it's that being quiet that I think that is the suppression. And that is us holding on, beneath the quiet is the bubbling anger. Yeah. So
yeah, totally. And like being in relationship with all of our feelings, right? All of the 5 core feelings that we have allows us to get much more subtle and more preemptive about the sensation of them in our body, right? So it's like anger starts as a sensation that can be recognized, that's very small and subtle, not out of control, not raging, not something that is damaging us or other people in that initial phase. It becomes that when we ignore it, when we don't know what to do with it, we don't know how to discharge it, we are afraid to express it, we think it's inappropriate, there isn't an avenue, whatever the case. And so being in relationship with our feelings, all of them, give us much more subtlety in sensing those preemptive sensations of them in the body and knowing then what to do with them, right? So that first sensation of anger, it's information. There's something not right happening right now. Like when I was told to just smile and take it from that dude, like that sensation of anger in my chest is telling me that that's not okay. I am being wronged. And there is a response that's being asked of me. But what challenges us is when we don't know what to do with it. And so that response becomes out of control. And that response becomes outside of compassion for ourselves and for other people, outside of gratitude, outside of being true to ourselves and being diligent and so forth. So working with this, the simple structure that we can pattern over and over again allows us to be with our emotions in a dance and a dialogue and a collaboration so that we can respond appropriately to them. We can notice what they're there to show us and then move them through before they become something that we're not in control of. Yeah, which is my understanding of how they're intended to function.
Yeah, fantastic. There is something in the introduction to the precepts, and it talks about the blessings that we receive. Yeah. And these are the blessings, what you've just outlined. Ways to work, ways to be, how they can help us to be a whole, healed, working to be healed person. Yeah.
I think that's true so much about the nature of anger being so reactive, and if I could take off my Reiki geek glasses and put on my yoga geek glasses, I would look at it from a yogic perspective, which is that anger transforms. It's a move emotion. It makes you react to it, and almost in that way it's a good thing, because you need that reaction to step out of whatever it is. So if it's a boundary that's been crossed, it's like, I'm going to speak up and stand up for myself, but the danger is when it's in just such a reactive place and a destructive place. And so I feel like the precepts, I look at it then from then, it's like I am going to sit with my anger until I'm not reacting from an angry place. And like Michaela said, I have anger, but it doesn't have me. And then I think I can kind of channel that righteous anger, or when something is really wrong, I can say like powerfully and use that energy to say that's wrong, and I'm going to do something about it.
I don't actually think we should use anger. I don't think anger in a world that I would like to live in. Yeah. I don't think in that ideal world, which I do think that the precepts are taking us to that ideal world. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anger exists.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say there's a difference between concern and anger. And, speaking up doesn't have to be angry. But I do understand what you're saying about that spark, and that I think we're probably all saying the same thing, just differently, So maybe, that little spark, that thing that it's like, because someone has something's happened, and how we use that, definitely, And
I think that's, sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, go for it.
I'm excited. I love this stuff. I think that's such a great way to describe it, right? That spark that comes forward, grabs our attention, and then what do we do with it, right? And so the precepts and the rest of the system then gives us a pathway to metabolize it, so that when we react, as you're saying, we're not actually reacting in anger. We've already addressed the anger. The spark has given us what it needed, and so that our response is now coming from that place of compassion for ourselves and for other people. That is our fifth precept. There's this really delightful and wonderful section in the Book of Joy with the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, where they discuss this very thing, where the Archbishop is really like, no, righteous anger is valuable. Like, when I draw on that energy and act, on behalf of my people from that energy, like that's a good thing. And the Dalai Lama was saying something more like what you were saying, is that actually our goal should be to get to a place where we don't even ever have to do that. However, here in this world that we live in, where there's so many points of provocation for that spark to come forward, it's going to come forward, right? And therefore, just for today, we need to work with what is true right now, be grateful for what is true right now, which is that, anger, right? Because there's something that's inflaming it. And so then, as you say, I think we're all kind of speaking around the same thing, is like, then metabolize, process, integrate that spark, and then act from that place of integration where we understand what the provocation was and how we're meant to respond, but the response is not the energy of anger coming from us.
Consciousness is the way I always describe it. Us being conscious of what we're doing. Yeah.
Well, I need to wrap up. Well, thank you all so much for joining us on this third episode of the Reiki Women Podcast, where we get deep into the concept of the precepts. So before we leave, just for today, anger not, worry not, be grateful, be true to your way and work hard at that, and be compassionate to yourself and others. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I better not imprint my kid with anger by like leaving him at
See you later, alligator. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.